The restaurant's quiet was shattered when millionaire Arthur Vance loudly insulted Daniel Hayes, the weary single-dad waiter, over a delayed entree. Though Daniel apologized, Vance, seeking domination, deliberately kicked him hard in the shin, a cold and calculated act of cruelty. The entire room all instantly froze. But this was not a normal man stumbling. Daniel's rigid body stopped, his foot hitting the marble with unnatural, dangerous solidity, absorbing the full blow without flinching. His restraint was broken. Vance offered an icy grin, completely unaware that the kick had just awakened the sleeping, former ghost inside the waiter's body. Daniel Hayes, a man in his mid-30s, looked every bit the exhausted, subservient waiter. He worked double evening shifts, sacrificing sleep and social life to afford the small apartment where he raised his son, Leo, alone. But the truth about Daniel Hayes was buried deep beneath the stiff, starched white collar and the black apron. His past was not merely military, it was elite, deadly, and highly classified. He was once a ghost, a legendary operative in a specialized counterterrorism unit, trained in the harshest environments to master non-lethal disarmament and silent target suppression. His movements were calculated, his reaction time nearly non-existent, and his capacity for violence absolute. He often found his mind drifting to the relentless training drills, a sharp contrast to the pampered atmosphere of the restaurant. He recalled the icy cold of the Arctic training camp, 3 days awake under constant stress and painful endurance exercises. He distinctly remembered the specific drill, the broken doll, where operatives had to disarm an attacker with minimal force while maintaining complete emotional neutrality, a test of discipline more than strength. His trainers had called him a prodigy, noting his terrifying ability to switch from passive observation to surgical action in less than a tenth of a second. This mastery was why he could currently absorb Vance's insults with a face that betrayed none of the killer instincts beneath. The waiter's facade was the hardest uniform he had ever earned. He had left that life 3 years prior, shattered by a devastating personal tragedy. His wife, Sarah, a humanitarian aid worker, had been killed in a politically motivated accident while he was deployed overseas. He received the news in a secure bunker, hours after successfully executing a silent, perfect extraction of a high-value target. The irony was a crushing weight. He had the power to destabilize governments and end lives, yet he was utterly powerless to save the person who mattered most. That helplessness fueled his desperate search for a life of profound, boring peace. His motto became simple: no escalation, no attention, just Leo. Every day he put on the humble uniform, building mental walls so thick that the constant stream of contempt from customers could not penetrate the core of his self-worth. He was determined to live a life so utterly normal, so statistically insignificant, that fate would overlook him and his son. The discipline required to be a great warrior was nothing compared to the discipline required to be a good waiter in this restaurant. Here he was routinely dismissed, overlooked, and treated like an automaton by the affluent clientele who often saw him as mere furniture, an extension of the silverware. He had perfected the art of the perfect placating smile, the silent, slick retreat, and the immediate, non-confrontational apology. These were his current tools for survival. Arthur Vance, the millionaire, was a notorious figure in the city, a real estate mogul known for his sharp suits and even sharper cruelty. He was accustomed to absolute deference and treated service staff like fixtures that should only move when commanded. His current tyrannical evening started subtly. First a complaint about a soiled napkin, then a demand for faster water service, finally an insistence that his champagne temperature was exactly 1 degree too warm. These gripes quickly escalated into personal attacks. "You," Vance sneered, pointing a thick gold-ringed finger, "are clearly a failure, Hayes. The only thing slower than your service must be your career progression. What kind of man settles for this life?" The shift manager, terrified of losing a major customer's tip or incurring a negative online review, was conveniently out of sight, refusing to intervene, leaving Daniel exposed. The surrounding diners sat in silence, treating the humiliation as standard, if uncomfortable, dinner theater. Daniel swallowed his pride and apologized countless times, his voice steady despite the raw insults. But his hands were trembling, not from exhaustion, but from the immense mental pressure of suppression. Leo watched it all from the corner, his small hands clenched until his knuckles were white. The boy's pain was a dull, aching burn in Daniel's chest, a signal that his walls were weakening. The inevitable breaking point came when Vance, seeking a final, undeniable assertion of dominance, delivered the deliberate kick. It was not a casual nudge. It was a hard, purposeful strike designed to make Daniel stumble. It hit Daniel's leg just above the ankle, sharp and loud enough to briefly silence the music. The pain was instantaneous, but Daniel's consciousness immediately focused on the tactical response. Do not move. Do not react. Control. His body stopped instantly, grounding his weight in a perfect, unconscious Kibadachi stance, honed over years of combat training. He neither stumbled nor shifted balance an inch. A few older, wiser patrons, including a retired colonel named Marcus Thorne 2 tables over, noticed the unnatural stability in his posture, a detail too precise for a mere waiter. A cold flash of recognition, a professional understanding, crossed Thorne's eyes. The carefully constructed facade of professional patience was finally fracturing, and the sleeping ghost began to stir beneath the surface. His limit had been reached. The atmosphere in the restaurant had changed violently. The room was now taut with a dangerous quiet stillness, the kind of calm before a lightning strike. Arthur Vance, the millionaire, snorted a laugh, his face contorted in a victorious sneer, clearly believing he had succeeded in delivering the final, humiliating lesson. Leo, wide-eyed with a combination of fear and intense anguish, took a hesitant step forward and whispered, "Dad." Daniel's heart clenched, but he maintained his outward calm. He raised one hand, placing it fleetingly on his son's shoulder, a silent, powerful command for the boy to stay put. Then slowly, deliberately, Daniel straightened up from the slight bow, raising his eyes to meet the millionaire's gaze directly for the first time. He made no sound, no threat, but his posture suddenly became solid, rooted, a perfect, effortless balance that belied his intense professional training. His eyes, usually softened by the waiter persona, were now cold, calculating, empty, deep pools. The internal struggle was monumental. Daniel's mind, operating on military time, registered the precise duration of the ongoing attack. 3 minutes and 17 seconds since the first verbal insult, 9 seconds since the physical strike. His training screamed for a preemptive strike, a movement so swift and efficient that Vance wouldn't even register the pain before he was unconscious. Daniel resisted this urge with every fiber of his being. He reviewed his self-imposed rules of engagement. No contact unless absolutely necessary for self-defense. Protect Leo above all. Do not break the peace. Colonel Thorne, the retired soldier, observed Daniel's posture closely, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. He recognized the disciplined, ready composure of a seasoned professional combatant, a man trained to be comfortable in the space between action and inaction. He knew this wasn't an argument. This was the prelude to combat, and the waiter was winning the psychological battle simply by standing still. The manager finally scrambled over, stammering a panicked apology to Vance. But the moment for subtle intervention had long passed. Vance, mistaking Daniel's stillness for fear, took another step forward, closing the distance. A fatal error. He raised his voice, preparing to deliver the final verbal blow, threatening Daniel's livelihood. "You'll apologize for your incompetence, Hayes, and then you'll clean up your son's toys and get out of my sight. You don't belong here, just like you don't belong in polite society." The attack was now personal, striking directly at Daniel's worth as a provider and a father. Daniel still didn't move, his hands empty, his body relaxed yet coiled with a terrifying, latent energy. His knuckles bore faint scars, a training injury from a bone-crushing grip. And the memory of that pain was the only reminder he needed to maintain control. He spoke only one demand, his voice low, measured, and cutting across the silent room. "Apologize to my son." His demand was not about the kick, not about the delayed food, but about his son's dignity. The entire crowd held its breath. The weight of the moment was crushing. The manager swallowed hard, trying uselessly to mediate. "Mr. Vance, please, just calm down. We can comp the meal." But Vance had tasted dominance and was drunk on it. He threw his head back and laughed, a loud, cruel sound that was a complete dismissal of the demand. He spat out, "Apologize to the brat? Who do you think you are, a war hero? You serve me soup? Get on your knees and thank me for not calling the police for obstruction." That phrase, the final, brutal insult aimed at his son and his profession, snapped the last thin wire of Daniel's restraint. The internal rules of engagement were instantly suspended, replaced by the primitive, single directive: threat detected, neutralize. Daniel's eyes narrowed imperceptibly as the energy shifted completely. Now the momentum was his, and everyone in the room sensed the shift from tension to inevitability. The entire restaurant, diners, staff, and the terrified manager, waited, frozen, to see the impossible reaction from the man they thought was only a waiter. The air felt thick, charged with the certainty that Daniel would not back down again. The millionaire, enraged by the waiter's unyielding defiance and mistaking his silence for weakness, leaned back. He swung an open palm violently toward Daniel's face, a sloppy, wide, emotional attack. Daniel's body reacted in a microsecond, a subtle, dazzling flash of absolute defensive, high-level muscle memory, honed through thousands of hours of training. He did not dodge, he intercepted. His left hand caught the incoming wrist with the precision of a vice, while his right hand immediately secured Vance's elbow. The next move was a showcase of controlled lethality. Daniel did not use brute force. He used the millionaire's own momentum against him. It was a perfect textbook takedown, a move known in his unit as the serpent's coil, precise, economical, and without excessive force. The key was leverage. Daniel lowered his center of gravity slightly, rotated the wrist, and twisted his torso. Arthur Vance was instantly grounded and pinned to the marble floor in a matter of seconds, his arm locked painfully but unbroken behind his back. The air rushed out of Vance's lungs with a pathetic, gasping wheeze. There was no blood, no messy brawl, and no unnecessary spectacle. Only total, devastating, surgical control. The entire restaurant was silent, so quiet that the faint music seemed deafening, emphasizing the sound of the millionaires struggling on the polished floor. Colonel Thorne, the retired soldier, shot to his feet, knocking over his chair, the sound echoing in the stillness. His eyes, fixed on the exact mechanism of the takedown, widened in professional recognition. Thorne, a man who had seen combat across 3 continents, immediately knew 2 things. First, that Daniel had saved Vance from himself, and second, that Daniel was operating on a level of training few civilians had ever heard of. He recognized the specific rotational kinetic energy transfer, a signature move used to neutralize threats without requiring follow-up strikes. That's not police training. That's a Tier 1 methodology, wrist lock, fulcrum. That's the signature of the Joint Special Operations Command. He's Delta Force. He's a ghost. Thorne's voice, a loud blast demanding attention, cut through the silence. The revelation was stunning and undeniable. Daniel Hayes was not just a waiter who knew a few self-defense moves. He was an elite former Special Forces operator, a silent lion, trained for lethal close-quarters combat, who had been at the absolute peak of military capability. He had only left the service after the loss of his wife to devote himself entirely to raising Leo in peace. The crowd gasped as the truth sunk in. The man they had laughed at and abused was a precision weapon, currently demonstrating restraint that defied his abilities. The first twist was confirmed. Daniel was the most dangerous man in the room, yet he was the one serving their wine. The second twist came with Daniel's voice. He applied just enough pressure to keep Vance immobilized, and spoke in a low, cold, terrifying whisper that only Vance and the nearby colonel could hear. Vance, pressed against the cold marble, could smell the high-polished wax and his own fear. His mind, usually sharp and calculating, was scrambled by the sudden, brutal shock of helplessness. He felt the immense, scary density of Daniel's body above him, a density that spoke not of muscular bulk, but of perfect, centered balance. It was the feeling of being held down by gravity itself. He registered the small, invisible scars on the waiter's hand, which were pressing down on his pressure points. He saw reflected on the mirror-like floor the intense, non-negotiable calm in Daniel's eyes. "Mr. Vance, I want you to listen carefully." Daniel's voice vibrated with controlled fury. "The way you kicked me? If I had reacted with the speed you demanded, the speed my body is trained for, I would have counter-rotated and fractured your tibia in 4 places. I restrained myself. I used the minimum force necessary to terminate your aggression. You initiated physical violence against a civilian employee in his workplace. Understand this. I am not just a waiter. I am your defense against a severe injury right now. I am defending myself and my son." Leo, witnessing the takedown, rushed to his father's side, clutching the black apron. He looked up at his father with a mixture of terror and deep pride, finally understanding the silent strength his father carried. Daniel immediately released the wrist the moment Leo touched him, stepping back smoothly and gracefully, his hands raised slightly and open, displaying his passivity to the room. He positioned his body defensively between the terrified Vance and his son, the image of quiet, non-aggressive strength. Arthur Vance lay on the floor, momentarily paralyzed, shaking uncontrollably, not from pain, but from the sudden, visceral realization of how close he had come to being legally and permanently crippled by the man he had just tried to humiliate. The fear was primal, shattering his arrogant worldview. The manager, finally recovered from the shock, rushed to Daniel, his face pale, frantically calling the police and citing the assault initiated by Mr. Vance. There were dozens of unimpeachable witnesses, now all standing in respectful silence. The power of wealth, the ultimate shield of the arrogant, was completely useless against the force of Daniel's controlled discipline. The police arrived swiftly, 2 patrol officers, followed by a plainclothes detective alerted by the colonel's specific call to the station. Statements were taken. The security camera footage, reviewed instantly by the detective on a tablet, clearly confirmed Daniel's minimal, purely defensive action. The female detective, named Detective Miller, who specialized in high-profile assaults, approached Daniel. She spoke quietly, respectfully. "Hayes, you handled that perfectly. Textbook defense. I see you have quite a background. We'll be taking Mr. Vance downtown for assault and disturbing the peace." Arthur Vance was quickly escorted off the premises, his expensive suit rumpled, his face burning with a public, profound humiliation that was far worse than any physical injury. The restaurant owner, Mr. Thompson, who had just rushed back from a meeting, stood before Daniel and, in front of all the remaining attentive guests, publicly apologized to Daniel and his son. "Daniel," Thompson said, his voice carrying genuine sincerity, "I am sorry for the environment we created that allowed this behavior. You and Leo deserve better treatment. We are all deeply grateful for your control." The atmosphere had completely reversed. The wealthy patrons who had snickered earlier now looked at Daniel with sincere respect and admiration. Leo was surrounded by people offering support, gently patting him on the shoulder and assuring him his father was a true hero. The retired Colonel Thorne approached Daniel, his eyes conveying deep respect. "Daniel Hayes," he said, extending his hand. "Colonel Marcus Thorne, retired. I recognized your methodology, the Serpent's Coil takedown. You are a credit to your training. You saved yourself from a lawsuit and that fool from a broken limb. Thank you for displaying true restraint today. That is what separates the professional from the thug." Thorne then leaned in, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "If you decide the service industry is no longer for you, son, look me up. I run a private security consulting firm. Your specific skill set, that level of disciplined response, is worth far more than tips and apologies. Think about it." Daniel shook the colonel's hand firmly, meeting his gaze. "Thank you, Colonel. But the life I want now, it requires peace, not combat. My discipline is for holding back, not engaging. The highest form of skill I've learned is choosing not to use it." Thorne paused, a rare smile gracing his lips. "That, Mr. Hayes, is the mark of a truly great man. You're not just an operator, you're a philosopher of force. If you stay here, I know this place will change." He nodded once, a final high-level gesture of respect, and departed. Daniel deflected the praise with a slight nod, saying he just wanted to finish his shift duties, complete the police reports, and go home to his son. He refused to generate any further spectacle. The restaurant owner, Mr. Thompson, pulled Daniel aside. He was impressed not only by Daniel's defensive skill, but by his sheer calmness and his refusal to capitalize on the moment. "Daniel," Thompson stated, his voice firm, "I am offering you a non-negotiable promotion. I need that level of discipline and character running my floor. I am making you the manager of human resources and operations, effective tomorrow. The salary is triple your current pay, with a significant annual bonus tied to staff retention and customer satisfaction. The hours are strictly 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., giving you every evening with your son. Furthermore, you will be responsible for developing a new internal security and de-escalation protocol for all staff. Your unique expertise is an asset I refuse to waste on carrying plates. You will train my staff on de-escalation, and you will set the tone of respect in this establishment. We need you, Daniel. We need your integrity." Daniel considered the offer carefully. It wasn't just about the money, which was substantial enough to afford Leo a better education and a more comfortable apartment. It was about the time with Leo, time his old life had stolen. It was a chance to use his discipline, his lethal capability, not for war, but to enforce a micro-peace in a safe, controlled environment. It was a safe fight for a better life. He glanced over at Leo, who was now smiling, chatting happily with Colonel Thorne. The choice was clear. He accepted the new path. The eventful evening ended in a strange, profound silence, the air now heavy with respect rather than tension. The revitalizing detail: Daniel and Leo shared a quiet, simple late dinner at their small apartment. Their comfort food, simple pasta. The safety of routine was a welcome relief. Leo looked up at his father, his eyes shining with new wonder. "Dad, are you really that strong? Stronger than all those bad guys?" Daniel smiled gently, lightly wiping a smudge of sauce from his son's cheek. He met his son's gaze with absolute honesty. "I'm just strong enough to protect you, son. That's all that matters." The lost and trampled respect was rebuilt in that moment, firmly rooted in the truth of his protective strength. No one, neither the restaurant staff nor the former patrons, would ever look upon Daniel Hayes with contempt again. Life resumed its rhythm, but the perception of Daniel Hayes had changed irrevocably. He was known now not for the apron, but for his quiet dignity and lethal control. The very next morning, Daniel walked into the restaurant wearing a tailored suit, not an apron. The staff, who had always considered him one of their own but also a victim, now looked upon him with cautious respect. He called an immediate meeting, not in the back office, but in the main dining room, standing right where Vance had been pinned down the night before. His first official act as manager of human resources and operations was to post a simple framed code of conduct near the service entrance. It contained just 2 lines. 1. Courtesy is mandatory, regardless of the tip. 2. No employee shall endure physical or verbal abuse from a customer. Immediate security intervention is the new protocol. He addressed the staff, his voice calm but resonating with authority. "We are professionals. Our value is inherent, not dependent on the whim of a customer. I am here to manage, but primarily I am here to protect the integrity and safety of everyone working this floor. We serve with excellence, and we demand respect in return." The era of silent endurance is over. The staff erupted in quiet applause, a palpable shift in morale sweeping the room. He began his new role, establishing a culture where respect for every employee was paramount. He trained the staff not in combat, but in reading emotional tells and effective de-escalation, using his past to secure their future. He never boasted about his background, keeping the silent lion carefully caged, but his presence alone guaranteed order. Leo walked with a new, quiet confidence, no longer feeling the need to shrink or hide from the world, proud of his father's quiet strength. His afternoons were now spent playing in the park, not waiting in the corner of a noisy restaurant. The restaurant, under Daniel's new leadership, became a benchmark for the industry, a place where people came for the service and stayed for the genuinely civil atmosphere. Arthur Vance was quickly forgotten, his name now only whispered as a cautionary tale of arrogance punished by fate. Daniel's honor was ultimately secured not by chaos or vengeance, but by the absolute, spectacular control he exerted over his capacity for violence. He understood that true strength was not the ability to win a fight, but the ability to prevent one. The final message was clear. True strength is knowing when and how to hold back when you possess the power to destroy. A person's worth is never measured by their bank account or the uniform they wear. The final echoing silence that settled over the restaurant in Daniel's life was stronger than any noisy confrontation. It was the sound of hard-won peace, of dignity restored, and of a life justly reclaimed. The single father and son walked out of the heavy shadow of the restaurant, stepping together into the soft light of the street lamps, hand in hand. A new, more dignified chapter had begun, founded on quiet integrity and resolute control. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe to NL Touching Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten.